Welcome back, Idiot Squared viewers. This week, we're going to be discussing the solar revolution. The solar industrial revolution is the biggest investment opportunity in history, writes Casey Hadmer of Terraform Industries. We're going to be covering this topic. This is pretty exciting. Really cheap energy. It could be a massive game changer and could also help with climate change. We're going to dive straight in. This is a wild topic. What Terraform Industries is doing is kind of insane, turning air and sunlight into hydrocarbons. And their goal is to have really green hydrogen for under $1 per kilo. It's wild. We're going to dive straight in. Polsker, I sent you this blog post by Casey Hadmer of Terraform Industries. It's pretty wild. This is the first time you're seeing it. So I'm going to cover it just quickly, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion. So,
sounds good, guy.
Casey writes, solar is in the process of shearing off the base of the entire global industrial stack. Energy and the tech sector still lacks a unified thesis for how to best enable, accelerate, and exploit this transition. Modern humans evolved perhaps 200 years ago, and for the 10,000 intervening generations between then and now, endured 100 billion mostly short, poverty-stricken, ignorant, and fearful lifetimes.
200,000 years ago.
Yeah, he says perhaps, right? Because no one really knows just yet. Graham Hancock and all those other people, we spoke about this previously, about all this. But he goes on to write, our current time is so different from even the lives of our grandparents that it is difficult to make a comparison, but clearly something has changed. And he has a chart here that shows global population over time. And it's also the number of people living in extreme poverty in red and the number of people not in extreme poverty in green. And we're starting to see a divergence, right? So the population is increasing and the number of people living in extreme poverty is decreasing rapidly.
It looks like this divergence started occurring in 1970s.
Yes. And we see like a small little dip, and then we start to see some bigger ones, and it started to accelerate. So this is interesting. And essentially what this comes down to, I'll just do the short version, is it's our ability to use energy. Right. So the more energy we use as a civilization, the less people are in poverty. Lots of people think that that's a bad thing. We should use less. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to stop using so much energy. We're polluting the environment. We're causing climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And whilst some of that can be true in terms of, contributing to climate change, it does not mean that we should stop using energy. In actual fact, turns out we should be using more and more and more energy. And this is his thesis with this solar stuff, is that as solar comes on board, we're going to have incredible amounts of incredibly cheap energy. And we should be using that to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and turn it into hydrocarbons that can then be used. So essentially, these are clean or green hydrocarbons. So it's not about not using hydrocarbons or stop drilling for oil. It's actually about using this abundant, cheap energy to convert carbon dioxide in the atmosphere into hydrocarbons, which is fascinating. It's a really cool process. So his company is called Terraform Industries. There's a couple of good videos online about him. He's got a great blog. This is where we're reading this from. We're going to discuss this. So is anything here news to you?
Well, recently, I kind of got turned on to solar energy. We talked about it a few podcasts ago or a while ago, but I was under the assumption that it was kind of bullshit, kind of like wind energy. I used to think both wind and solar energy were sort of just kind of a bullshit, not a very effective alternative to, energy alternative. But then after discussing it more in detail with you, I've come to the realization that there is a lot of potential with solar. And as technology always improves, solar energy will also improve, right? But I'm not fully aware of how much solar energy can improve, because I think I might have heard someone ask Elon Musk whether or not it's possible to power a car with solar energy. And I believe he said that there's not enough surface area on the car to effectively place solar panels in order for it to power a car. So then I started thinking, well, how effective can we get solar energy? And forgot to mention one thing. Elon Musk said that it's likely we won't get solar energy far enough along or advanced enough for it to be able to power an entire car with the amount of surface area that's on a car. So we currently don't have that technology, and it's likely we won't have that technology in the future. So I'm kind of wondering still, how effective can solar energy become?
So, yes, this is a big problem. Is that there isn't enough surface area, and you do require decent amounts of surface area to produce enough power or to harness enough power from the sun, right? And then also, like, you've got the problem of, like, when it's not sunny, you don't have the same ability to generate same levels of power. Okay, so this is where Casey's company actually comes in, Terraform Industries. So what they're proposing is, batteries are expensive and they take up a lot of space. We already have a huge amount of infrastructure in place for hydrocarbons, right? Like, so, the ability to drill oil and then transport it and convert it into, like, petrol, gasoline, diesel, all of those different things, has transformed the way that we as humans are able to live, and it's transformed our ability to do things in this universe, right? To channel that energy. So hydrocarbons are very dense forms of energy. So we already have all that infrastructure in place, right? So what he's proposing is he wants to use solar, right? So you can set up these large solar farms, essentially. And they're developing technology that essentially plugs onto the side of a solar farm and utilizes all of that ridiculously cheap energy that's coming from the solar panels with minimal transportation costs, because it's right next to it. Okay, so you're not losing anything in transmission. You're fully taking advantage of the amount of power that's being generated from those solar panels. And what he's proposing, or the system they're developing, is to then capture carbon dioxide and water from the atmosphere. Okay, put it through a process of electrolysis, right, so that you can split the hydrogen from the oxygen. Okay, and then bind that hydrogen to carbon that has also been captured and turn it into methane or hydrocarbons, essentially, right? And then from there, you can then transport those hydrocarbons to where they need to go, because you already have the infrastructure in place for that transportation. So this is an alternative to batteries, right? So it's actually a very ingenious way to take advantage of the positives and the benefits and the power generation of solar without having to worry about the batteries, without having to worry about all these other things. So like hydrocarbons are essentially a battery in a sense. That kind of makes sense.
So no, it does make sense. It does make sense. I didn't realize that proximity was an issue. I didn't realize that if you're further away from a solar farm or a power plant, that you lose the efficiency, or you lose some of the power depending on approximation, or like how far away you're from that. I didn't realize that was even a factor.
It's huge. Power loss for transmission is massive, which is why it's like, it's very costly to send energy long distances.
All right, because we lose it as heat, right?
Because of inefficiencies in the conductors, right? So if we had superconductors, essentially you would lose much less of that. But we do.
Okay. So the idea is set up communities where each community is in close proximation to a solar farm. That's the idea?
Well, he's not necessarily talking about the communities. He's more talking about like setting these up near big solar farms, or on the side of that, like it's setting these up next to like large scale mining facilities, right? Because you can then use either the solar power or the hydrocarbons for that industry. But then you can also like do when you have an abundance of cheap energy, like energy is causality in a sense. You can direct it to do things like transformations in the universe. So you can do incredible transformations to raw materials, right? You can transmute things essentially. You can turn one thing into another thing that you want it to be. And so the more power, more energy we have, the more you can direct those causal edges. Welcome to Good Meals. I'm Ruben. I'm the founder and developer of Good Meals, and I'm here to introduce you to a smarter way to approach your diet. Forget the one-size-fits-all meal plans. Good Meals is about precision, personalization, and simplicity. It's not just a meal planner, it's a tool that adapts to you. Start by telling us about yourself. Your goals are unique, so should be your meal plan. Good Meals utilizes advanced AI to tailor every meal to your specific nutritional needs. Here's where it gets interesting. Our extensive database isn't just a collection of recipes, it's a culinary exploration. Whether you have specific dietary preferences or just what's available in your fridge, Good Meals finds the perfect recipe for you. And it's not just about variety. We focus on the nutritional value, ensuring that every bite takes you closer to your health goals. Join Good Meals today at goodmeals.health. It's not just about eating better, it's about revolutionizing the way you think about food. Because at Good Meals, every meal is a step towards a healthier, happier you.
I get the technology, right? But why is he saying that it's the biggest industrial revolution, like the biggest investment opportunity? What's his...
Because it's our cost of energy that sort of drives all of this innovation and all of this improvement in quality of life. As we we were in the hydrocarbon age, essentially. You know how people talk about the Bronze Age, the Copper Age, the Iron Age, etc. We've been in the hydrocarbon age. And what that's allowed us to do is to grow massively, to develop technologies, to do more in the universe. Energy is causal edges. And so the more energy we can use and direct towards direct those causal edges in the directions we want, the more we can do, the better we develop as a society, the greater our quality of life becomes.
So
yeah, that is the argument. The fact that solar technology is now at a point where we can, it's decently efficient. We have the ability to manufacture these at large scales, and we can roll it out and start harnessing the just ridiculous amounts of energy that is bombarded onto Earth every single day from the sun. Allows us to have an abundance of really, really, really cheap energy.
all right, so but what is Casey's argument for how this can be possible? Because there's a lot of industries, energy industries, which are currently, big players that can exactly just bend over and allow for solar to become the biggest potential player, right? So,
I will tell you. So,
nice.
Oil, he writes this in his blog, but I'm just going to paraphrase essentially. Oil is finite. He says the good stuff is gone. Fracking is expensive. Most places don't have oil. Climate and scarcity will force us to use other forms of energy, most of them not as useful as oil. Are we headed for economic difficulties as a result of this? A handful of nations have endured severe energy shortages due to political instability, and it has never gone well for them. North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. Are we doomed? The answer is no. Solar photovoltaic power got cheap, then big, then cheaper, then bigger. Last year, we installed about 460 gigawatts of solar globally. So what he's saying, and this is true, so there's a great book by Vaclav Smil. Bill Gates is like one of the only people that's ever read all of Vaclav Smil's books, which put me off initially, but then I started reading them. I was like, hey, this guy's he does do some interesting stuff. But he has a book called How the World Really Works. And it's fantastic. It's like a lot of common sense stuff, but he just articulates it quite well with good amounts of data. And so if you look at like what allowed the human population to expand to what it has expanded to today, and it's like, the use of technology, but largely it's hydrocarbons, right? So for 250 milliliters of diesel, you can produce a certain amount of food. Right, you can produce a certain amount of bread, a certain amount of corn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that can be used to feed more people. Those people can be used to do different work, more knowledge work, create new knowledge, et cetera, and the cycle of progress continues. Okay, so what we do as humans is we exploit these things, right? So for millions and millions of years, the planet had plants and animals and bacteria and different things stored entropy, and then it turned into hydrocarbons, and then we've been able to exploit that to release the energy from within that and direct it to things that we wanted to do that were productive for society, that led to us to develop, and that's all running out, right? So that would be really bad if we stop that. Our quality of life would drop. You can look at nations where, and he's given the example of North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela. He's given examples of where people haven't had access to abundant energy like other areas, and they have not developed at the same rate. So what he's saying is this is going to free people from not having oil. So some countries that didn't have oil have not benefited from this very much, right? Like, we know that the nations that are pretty rich in oil have done really, really well. And so what this is going to do is it's sort of democratizing that. So any country that wants to embrace large-scale solar will also be able to use that energy to turn into hydrocarbons now, to essentially supply their own sources. So instead of having to import and rely on other countries and massive trade routes and relying on large militaries to protect those trade routes, et cetera, we can essentially localize this and decentralize it in a sense, so that these countries can have access to large scale energy.
Yeah. So you think like first get developing nations on board with this idea if it's more cost effective, like Casey is arguing, get them to sort of progress more efficiently like other nations already have, get them going maybe up to par or some sort of advancements, and that's going to sort of put a lot of money into that solar industry, which then they can leverage and convince more developed nations to also adapt, because it's sort of like inevitable economically.
There's no convincing necessary here. It's already happening. It's underway. Like he states, last year, humanity installed 460 gigawatts of solar globally. And if you look at this graph, you can scroll down. He explains how to sort of understand this a bit better. But like there is a huge drop off in this. So like this is compounding massively. A learning rate of 44 means that the cost falls by 44% for every doubling of production, and production is currently doubling roughly every 18 months. So we spoke about this before, but Moore's law, which is the to do with computation, right, has led to the ability to do machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of these different things, large scale modeling, et cetera, et cetera. That's Moore's law enabled all of this technological development. This is kind of like a Moore's law for energy. And we're going to need this, right? Because running large language models or running AIs is very energy intensive. It's also very compute intensive, but you need energy to drive that compute. So we're going to need more of everything. And this is encouraging. Yeah, so we have Moore's law, which is to do with computation. And that has allowed us to do, AI, large scale modeling, all of this amazing stuff in terms of technology. And what we're finding is we need way more energy to run these things, right? Like, so running large language models is energy intensive. We need a lot of energy. But doing everything in the universe requires energy in a sense, right? Like, so what we want to do, direct that causality, we need energy to do it. So we want really cheap energy. And it just so happens that because of the development in solar, like how efficient it's becoming and the scale at which it can be manufactured now or produced, means that solar is going to become the cheapest form of energy. Like it already is in some places. So what can you do when you have really abundant, cheap energy? And then this is where his company, Terraform Industries, comes in. They're like, well, you can use this energy to take carbon out of the atmosphere and then, or take water out of the atmosphere as well, and then turn that into hydrocarbons. And so then you can sort of, you don't need all these batteries, you don't need all this other stuff on top of that, because you can turn it into hydrocarbons, which have been used for, the last how many years by civilization to get to this point. So it's like backwards compatible, which is really cool.
What about the manufacturing of solar panels? Isn't that like a pretty rigorous process that's quite, detrimental to the environment in many ways?
In, not really. Can be. It again. None of these things are inherently good or bad. It is what we do with them. Like hydrocarbons aren't inherently good or bad, but if you burn lots of them and put lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere without taking it out, that can lead to bad things for sure. Again, as we progress technology, we'll find solutions to all of these things. Problems are soluble, so to speak. So, yeah, no. What's worse for humanity and worse for the environment is us not using as much energy as we possibly can. So, like, again, the more energy you can use and that you have access to, the more you can direct causality to where you want it to. So if you want to make these processes more efficient and more sustainable, by having more energy, it's going to allow you to do that. More energy plus more compute is really going to help solve those problems. So, this is like a net good thing. It's pretty amazing, and it's a really cool way to think about it. But what he's saying is this is going to be like the biggest, this is going to be the new industrial revolution. And we already are in like a decade into it, right? Out of 3 decades that he reckons it's going to take. So this is his thesis, where it's going to take, like, there's a huge opportunity here to make a bunch of money, but also like help to direct where the future of humanity goes. The only downside to all of this is, as we scale compute and as we continue to develop machine learning and artificial intelligence, if we can get it to actually be intelligent and self-replicating and the rest of it, it could essentially outcompete us and just end up populating the entire planet in solar panels because it's way more efficient, right? So it's way more efficient than plants, right? So he goes through all of this. It's a great blog. But yeah, we'll keep going through and we can get into some more of the deep dive, right? So he says solar photovoltaics is not just a partial substitute for oil. It's a cheaper and better energy source in every way that matters. So he goes, our techno-capital machine is a thermodynamic mechanism that systematically hunts for and then maximally exploits the cheapest energy it can find. When it unlocks cheap energy, first coal, then oil, then gas, and now solar, it drives up the rate of economic growth due to an expanded spread between energy cost and application value. So when you have like abundance of really cheap energy, you can just do ridiculous shit, right? Because previously there's an energy bottleneck, right? Like you can't afford to buy enough coal, you can't afford to buy enough oil, you can't afford to do all this sort of stuff. But if solar energy becomes like 0.0000000000001 cents per kilowatt or whatever, kilowatt hour or whatever, incredibly cheap, you can just do ridiculous shit.
It's funny that the woke left is trying to get us to use less energy, dude. We need to be using more.
That's decel.
Like you said.
That's right.
Yeah.
More is honestly better in that regard, because we can do more with it. So he goes, in other words, we're now about a decade into a 3-decade process, the 6th industrial revolution, where the entire world economy and its industrial stack is eagerly switching to solar photovoltaics as its preferred source of cheap energy, creating enormous value. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is, so we have this, he's coining it the 6th industrial revolution. This is to do with energy. But we also have this massive development in terms of computation and machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is coming online as well. So it's just like these two things are meeting, which is going to be insane. And this is where people start to talk about the singularity and this inflection point where things will get weird real quick. Like things will become incredibly different really quickly. So our rate of change is increasing over time as well. And it looks like it's building up to ramp up rapidly.
The great acceleration, guy.
Yes, that is the term. So he goes, strangely, despite this being a locked-in inevitability, I am yet to see a rigorous, unified, and broad-based investment thesis formulated to capture durable long-term sources of value in the new economy now frantically constructing itself. It's in just the last few years, we've seen passing fads of investment in autonomous driving, VR, fusion, crypto, Web3, and AI, all built on as yet unrealized conviction that these technologies would create winner-take-most companies that would become as fundamental to our way of life as Google or Amazon. Yet the companies and industries that underlie our entire way of life are on a fast track to disruption from below, providing the first opportunity in a century and probably the last opportunity ever to rewrite the rulebook and ownership structure of the world of atoms, right? So computers are bits. He's talking about atoms here. And if you can start to transmute or transform atoms, you are essentially a universal constructor. You're a constructor. You can make and do what you want to do. And atoms are way harder than bits, right? So bits are pretty easy to work with. Atoms are way harder. And we will be doing an episode on universal constructors versus universal Turing machines. And yeah, constructors are in the space of the atoms. So it's a wild time. And he lays out a really good thesis. Like, it's a decent blog. It's not super long, but it's a very good read. So we'll just cover some of the key points, right? Any questions you have along the way, let me know. Okay. So he goes, for the remainder of this post, I'm going to lay out the most comprehensive list yet of the industrial applications of cheap energy, together with a prescription for their transition to solar as a fundamental source of energy and estimates of their economic value. Almost all of these require hardware innovation in heavy industry, the industry we should all aspire to work on. I think it makes sense to loosely group applications by type of process. Solar PV transforms solar energy in the form of light into direct current, DC, electricity during the day. The Earth receives about 173,000 terawatts continuously, so more than 10 times humanity's current needs. Now, key thing here is during the day, right? I can't remember if we discussed this on a podcast, but I remember I mentioned to you about this startup. Actually, maybe I didn't mention it to you. Anyway, there is a startup who are using satellites. The guy who founded the startup used to work for SpaceX, and they're launching satellites into space, and they will direct sunlight onto your solar farm at nighttime so that you can continuously generate energy.
Wow. Like a big ass mirror in space?
Yep. Yeah. So
that's amazing. That's amazing.
Really cool startup. And so even this point, right? So Casey's deep in this. He's founding a company that's doing amazing shit. But even he says, like that, during the day, when we also know that because of technology, that won't always be the case as well. So it's even more bullish, right?
Wow.
Even more bullish than what he is. And he's incredibly bullish. So this DC electricity can be used in that form, transformed to alternating current to power the grid, transformed into thermal energy using resistive heaters, split water into hydrogen and oxygen using electrolysis, or perform other electrocatalytic processes. So what he's doing is he's using split water into hydrogen using the energy and combining it with carbon so that he can then turn it into hydrocarbons. So that's what he's using, but he's showing that there are so many other things you can do with it. Electricity allows you to do amazing transformations. So with relatively minimal equipment, it's possible to transfer solar PV DC into synthetic fuels, which is what he's doing, which are backwards compatible with all the fossil fuel infrastructure we already have. So that's huge, because to roll out charging stations, to roll out all this new infrastructure takes so much time, right? Because, laws, regulations, bureaucracy, but just doing stuff in physical space over large distances takes immense amounts of time. So the fact that it's backwards compatible is huge. This approach, which minimizes the cost of gradually shifting hydrocarbon supply over to cheaper, chemically identical drop-in synthetic substitutes, consumes the bulk of my time at Terraform Industries. We are hiring. So some end uses are so expensive, e.g. large data centers, that it is economically compelling to use large battery systems to smooth out the power to run 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. Other end uses are so power intensive and cost sensitive, e.g. synthetic fuels, cement production, that batteries are cost prohibitive and solar applications must adapt to intermittent power production. Intermittent adaptation requires only two innovations: lower capex due to lower utilization and a throttleable process that can time match power availability. So he gives a little rundown on DC electricity. AI data centers, $300 billion and 10% growth. While it is uncertain exactly how much compute we need to saturate demand, current LLM capabilities already require significantly more electricity to scale than can be provided by the grid or even newly built gas or nuclear power plants, primarily due to supply chain constraints on steam turbines. The next generation of gigawatt-scale data centers will have to be powered, therefore, by solar and batteries, which are on their own precipitous cost decline and explosive growth curve shown below. Even at current prices, the cost of a gigawatt scale solar plant and a big enough battery for 99.9% uptime is 5% of the cost of the GPUs and racking hardware. The only sitting constraint is land. About 20,000 acres or 31 square miles is required to service that, right? So yeah, this is huge. Now, what he says, the reason it's with this newly built gas or nuclear power plants is we don't have infinite gas, okay? And nuclear power plants, although these like are the holy grail for energy production because that's what the sun's doing. If we could do that here, it would be fantastic as well. But they take so long to build, right? Like they're a huge engineering feat, whereas we actually have we have the ability to manufacture and make huge amounts of solar panels and roll them out pretty quickly. Like it's pretty easy to knock up a solar farm. Like here in Australia, we're actually getting huge amounts of these. I was historically kind of against this until like actually reading a lot of Casey's blog has sort of like white pilled me on it. But yeah, it just makes sense. It's bonkers.
And we got the land for it too, right? And I even heard of possibilities where there are certain types of lands that are, for example, not as fertile, right? So not good for growing crops, also not good for like building houses or buildings onto as well. Those lands that are not well suited for those types of projects are perfectly suited for solar farms because, you know, you don't need like a good foundation for solar panels. You can just build basically on top of the land. And, you know, if you fly from one city to another and you look down, you will see that we have a shit ton of land in every single country. Like it's crazy how much land we got.
There's a lot of land for sure. Some countries less so though, like Britain and places like that are pretty tiny relative to that. But like Australia for sure, America, Canada, Brazil, all those places, huge amounts. And it's the crazy thing, and like where you can get a little bit doomsday or like, you know, a bit scared of like the techno capital machine turning into, you know, like the Matrix, is that like it's actually way more efficient to put solar panels on the land than it is to use it for farming in some circumstances. All right. So solar panels are about 100 times more efficient than plants at converting solar energy into, useful food energy for humans kind of thing. So there's that, but we don't have to go down that scary future direction.
By the way, putting solar panels up on a house, can that actually power like a house? All of its needs? Can you go completely off the grid?
Yeah, if you have enough roof space for sure. But again, with solar, it only really works when the sun's out, right? So you're not generating power at nighttime. So you need some form of storage, which is batteries, and batteries are still expensive. So what he's saying here is like, yeah, you can roll all this solar out, and this has happened in Australia for over the last like 10 years, maybe 15 or more. Where there's more and more people getting solar on their rooftops, right, at their houses. But it's causing problems for our grid because the grid wasn't designed to sort of have power go both ways. It was sort of only really designed to have power go one way from power stations out. Whereas now, like when it's a really sunny day and you've got all these people with their solar panels on, they're sort of feeding electricity back into the grid, which can cause lots of problems, okay? So, yeah, it can, and you can go completely off grid. There's, a decent amount of people that have been doing that. But again, you require that infrastructure, the batteries and those kinds of things. So what he's proposing is to take advantage of this massive growth in solar and the ability to roll out solar and the rest of it. And then he's developing a technology to then turn that into hydrocarbons so that it's backwards compatible with all the infrastructure that we already have for fuels.
That makes sense. It makes sense because the solar panels essentially become the new grid, right? So you don't have like this forwards and backwards movement of energy like you were saying when it's a sunny day and everyone has their solar panels out.
Sort of. There's a bunch of different things going on here. So like, yeah, people will have more solar, but what he's proposing is like, you can actually set up these solar farms that will produce hydrocarbons that can then power cities, power communities, provide fuels to these people so that you don't have to have the ridiculous amounts of batteries to make it work.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. So it would essentially be the new grid. So we would go off of the current system, which we have in place, and replace it with solar power, like a solar power grid.
Yeah, so less coal and less traditional oil burning, and more of this new green hydrocarbons, clean hydrocarbons, so to speak. And battery technology will continue to grow as well. But again, they are quite cost prohibitive in that sense.
Yeah, and also, I don't know how good we are at recycling batteries, but batteries don't last forever. So what do you do with all these batteries, right?
Tesla's made some pretty big improvements in battery recycling technology. They've got it down to like some level of efficiency, which makes it, I think it's just broken even, or is just about to become like worthwhile to do it. So again, all these problems are in a sense soluble. Solutions can be found. The trick is having enough energy to do them. The more energy you can utilize or harness and direct, the more causality you can affect in the world, the more you can do, the more cool shit you can do. So like the whole meta point of this entire conversation, this entire blog post, everything is when we have, as we're rolling out all this solar, we're going to get so much more energy online. We're going to have all this extra energy that we can use to do stuff. So we've got to come up with really creative ways to utilize it that can help improve the quality of life. So part of what he's doing is he's taking carbon out of the atmosphere to produce these new hydrocarbons.
Yeah, which is dope. That's
exactly.
So sick.
So this next one, if you scroll down, it says solar desalination. So just scroll down a little bit lower. So because of this, like all this immense amounts of cheap energy, solar desalination starts to become viable. So this is turning salt water into fresh water. So, bye-bye freshwater crisis, hello abundance of fresh water. Yeah. So, he goes on to say environmental and ecological restoration. There's so much you can do when you have an abundance of cheap energy. He even goes, if you scroll down a little bit lower, he goes into the production of antimatter. So when you have really cheap, abundant energy, you can also start producing more antimatter, which is the highest or most energy dense fuel that we know of.
According to Terrence, there's no such thing as antimatter.
Yeah, Terrence. That's another discussion. Okay. Yeah, so he's got like all of these different so there's electrical thermal, so industrial heat, thermal energy storage, cement production, which is huge, and is by far the single most CO2 emissive and energy consuming industry is cement production. Humans produce 5 billion tons of it per year, and a staggering number reflecting the incredible utility of durable, cheap, pourable liquid stone. We literally build entire cities out of it. So like being able to offset that, being able to change or transform the way that that's done via having an abundance of energy is going to be huge. So he's got AC electricity, alternating current. So grid electricity is a $1.6 trillion industry, a 5% growth. So most solar PV today is used to generate alternating current for conventional grid-based energy consumption. So similar to what you were saying, either via rooftop solar or industrial scale solar farms. We have much lower which have much lower cost of production, but much higher distribution costs. So when you have a solar farm, you are producing that energy, but you've then got to distribute it out through the grid, right? And so remember we just discussed about sending it over long distances is very costly and you lose a lot of the energy. So having things close to that is key. So indeed, the primary constraint on solar industry growth today is the grid interconnection queue, which is what we're seeing in Australia. There's big problems with the grid is not built for this two-way sort of street. It's self-blocked by regulatory constraints. That said, today solar generates 6% of global energy, third among renewables behind hydro and wind, but by far the fastest growing energy source in history. The industry is relatively well developed, but growing 30% a year over year. So there's still about a decade left for major disruption on any of several major verticals, including panel manufacturing, solar development, battery manufacturing, battery product development, site construction, and management. So just to put this in perspective, Amazon is a humongous company, yeah? Amazon started out and they grew 25% a year.
Wow. So
Okay.
it's growing faster at Amazon.
Yes. And so this, solar, yeah, and it's year on year. So 30% year on year, that's exponential growth. Obviously, all things in reality end up not being exponentials in that sense. But the craziest thing with this plus AI and everything else, this could be the first exponential that doesn't sort of flatten out. I don't think it will, but.
So how do we invest, Guy?
Well, that's what we need to discuss in a minute. So electrolysis of water. So this is taking water and creating hydrogen and oxygen. So splitting the H2O to get hydrogen and oxygen. So solar DC power can be used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen using electrolysis. While this process has been more expensive than steam methane reforming for the last 70 years, solar PV is poised to make a comeback. Adapting electrolyzers to cheap, intermittent renewable power will enable green hydrogen below $1 a kilogram in the next few years. This is what his company's working on, which creates the opportunity to disrupt a bunch of enormous legacy chemical processes. Hydrogen itself is a horrible, pernicious molecule that will almost always be used immediately after generation by a reactor built adjacent to the point of hydrogen generation. Synthetic fuels, $6.8 trillion, growing 4%. Solar green hydrogen's largest use case is the catalytic reduction of atmospheric CO2 to produce synthetic hydrocarbon fuel, oil and gas from sunlight and air. Solar synthetic hydrocarbons are poised to undercut drilling as the cheapest source of chemical energy for humanity. While solar is already cheaper in the form of electricity and heat, despite the transformational economic effects of retrofitting the entire supply side of the global hydrocarbon supply chain over the next 2 decades. Relatively few companies, including my own Terraform Industries, Rivan, General Galactic, and Turn2X, are aggressively accelerating towards this goal. So I just want to, this is a kind of mind-blowing stat, right? Synthetic fuels, okay, so hydrocarbons. Every hour, this industry turns over $1 billion. Every hour, this industry turns over $1 billion. Hydrocarbons. Half the world's population suffers from hydrocarbon scarcity. Oil is the antidote to poverty. Synthetic fuels are the only way to increase oil supply, cut prices, and slash strategic and security supply chain issues. Synthetic fuels are the single biggest lever we can have to double global economic growth, unlocking oil supply to raise global oil consumption 5 barrels per day per person per year to US levels 22 barrels per person per year would increase revenue to $30 trillion a year. So solar synthetics, lowering prices to induce Texas level consumption, which is 54 barrels per person per year, increases revenue to $73 trillion a year. So this is massive, right? So he goes on about like all the cool transformations you can do with abundant energy. So fertilizers are a byproduct of having abundant energy, being able to create nitrogen-based fertilizers and phosphorus. Plastics industry requires that. So you can do all these amazing transformations to chemicals, to elements, to atoms, to produce products that you want when you have abundant energy, because it's that ability to drive transformations. I'm just going to keep stressing that. It's huge. So this is a massive thing. I highly recommend everyone read the blog. It's an awesome read. He's also got a lot of other really good reads on here, and he's got a bunch of information about his technology. So yeah, anything you want to discuss, Polska? Any questions?
Yeah, I want to know how we can invest in solar, dude. With this 30% growth year by year, dude, it sounds like it could be a pretty serious investment, guy.
Big time. So there'd be a bunch of ways, right? So understanding what goes into making solar panels, what materials are required. There's going to be a bunch of trades to do with copper. There's going to be a bunch of trades to do with silicon. I don't know about boron. Phosphorus potentially is used a lot. I don't know if there's much to be made in silicon. Silicon's quite abundant, but copper definitely, because just the nature of increasing all of this electricity-based stuff is going to do that. So I think copper is already actually pumping hard. I'm just checking. But yeah, okay. So how to invest in this, right? So looking at companies that manufacture solar panels, decent investments, possibly. Obviously, everyone should do their due diligence and their own research because it's sketchy, and don't just believe whatever people write on their websites. But yeah, looking at companies that manufacture solar panels, looking at companies that are developing, different battery technologies, looking at companies like Casey's that are developing novel ways to utilize solar energy. What else? I look at, what are the raw ingredients that goes into manufacturing solar panels, into batteries, into the electrification of things, right? So again, that's where copper is going to come in, and a bunch of other minerals. Looking at companies that either mine those or have something to do with that. Selling solar panels is another one. But yeah, there's essentially a pretty easy sort of space of things that you could invest in to potentially realize some of the upside of this.
So I get that there's been a lot of growth in this space, right? But this picture that Casey is painting, like, how likely do you think that this is gonna actually turn out the way he's proposing, or even like close to? Like, if you could put a percentage on it.
I'd say probably like 80%.
Oh, damn. All right. That's
Yeah.
pretty.
If like that point that he makes in there is so true. Is like the techno capital machine will find the cheapest form of energy and exploit the fuck out of it and use it to further its own progress, right? Like we spoke about this heaps of times. Like we're humans, we're like these organisms, we have all this, agency and stuff, but like collectively we form a meta-organism, and like society itself is another meta-organism. And it's all about just progress marching on. So it will find the cheapest form of energy and it will exploit it. It will utilize it. And because we have the capacity now to develop solar has got to the point where it's so efficient, it is becoming the cheapest form of energy, and it will become the cheapest form of energy. Pending some massive breakthroughs in like fusion or fission technologies, solar's going to be the thing. And even then, even if there is a breakthrough, it's like there's like a 10 to 20 year delay kind of vibe with that. It's just going to take so long for it to roll out because of regulations, and everyone's so fearful about it, and da. Whereas like, everyone's kind of solar pilled to some degree.
That's true. It's been around for a while now, dude. Like,
yeah. So like we've already a decade in. We're now at like this critical point where we've got another, two decades to go, so to speak. And I think that's what is sort of, he's like, he hasn't seen a clear investment thesis yet. So that's why he wrote that blog. And I think he's just crazy enough to be right.
Don't you think capitalism works on a global scale? Like, I feel like it does in a way, because that is a really good point, that it's just inevitable for it to happen because it's going to become the cheapest source of energy. Yeah. So economically speaking, it's almost inevitable. So if it does pan out the way it is, capitalism sure does work on a global scale. Maybe it doesn't work, on a lower level. Well,
it doesn't optimize for the individual, but governments, no one does. You can't, right? So this is even true in nature, right? You look at animals and stuff. It doesn't, the species or whatever doesn't optimize for the individual, optimizes for the whole species kind of vibe, as long as it can progress. And that's a harsh reality of being a human, is you got to sort of remember that, like, the time you live here might not be the greatest, but humanity will keep marching forward as long as we can still keep using abundant or more and more energy over time, essentially. So yeah, it's going to find the cheapest form of energy and exploit it. And it looks like that's solar. So yeah, just like NVIDIA was a great trade over the last, 5 years, solar is probably going to be the next great trade over the next 10 to 20 years. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But essentially what's going to happen is the price of energy is going to approximate or approach zero. It's just going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for energy. And so other potential ways to capitalize on this is to look at things that are essentially like quite energy intensive now and don't really make sense now, but when energy gets really cheap, do make a lot of sense and create huge amounts of value. They're also going to be good opportunities. If anyone would like a podcast on that, feel free to let us know in the comments and we can explore some of those things. I'd be interested in that. I'm actually going to do it for myself.
Hell yeah. Let's do it, guy.
Anything else before we wrap this one up?
I know that was actually super interesting, man. Interesting. That was dope, actually. I hope it does pan out the way Casey proposes, because it would benefit everybody, obviously.
Yeah. Hopefully over a long enough timescale. I am a little bit worried about the long-term horizon of this in terms of, AIs, just actual AIs, not what we currently have, but actual AIs taking over and just completely covering the earth in solar panels. But yeah, that's progress, yo. Maybe we've got to adapt to that too. All right, sweet. That was a good podcast. I'm glad you finally remembered his name. Drill it in. Casey Hadmer, check him out. He's a cool dude. He's an Aussie as well, by the way. And maybe a ginger ninja. I don't know. But peace out, guy.
Love you, dude.
Love you too, guy.
All
Bye.
right, peace.